Today, we're diving into a landmark legal battle that was a real David versus Goliath story. It pitted a small community of homeowners against a massive bank. This is the story of what happens when a promise is broken and the fight to make things right. I mean, think about it. It's a question that really gets to the heart of trust and fairness, right? When a huge institution gives you its word, what happens when it just, well, changes its mind? This case gives us a fascinating and really powerful answer.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll meet the key players and get the story behind the promise that started everything. Then, we'll get into the legal arguments, unpack the judge's final ruling, and wrap up with why this case is still so important today. All right, let's set the scene. Our story kicks off back in the late 1960s. You've got a community with a big dream for their future, and a bank that held the key to making it all happen. So on one side, you have Riverwoods Chappaqua, a co-op of homeowners all in on this shared dream. And on the other side, Midland Bank, the financial giant they were counting on to make it a reality. It really started out as this promising partnership, but you could see the power imbalance from day one. Now, if you look at this timeline, it's pretty wild how fast everything just fell apart. In '66, the bank makes a promise. So for 2 years, Riverwoods moves forward spending serious money based on that word. But then, bam, in '69, the bank just pulls the rug out from under them. Now, you got to remember, the late 60s were a time of rising interest rates. For the bank, that old deal was looking less and less profitable. But for Riverwoods, this change was catastrophic. By 1970, they were staring down financial ruin and felt they had no choice but to sue. And that's when this whole fight landed in the courtroom. The central question wasn't about some complicated contract or tiny fine print. Nope. It all boiled down to something much more basic. Was the bank's word legally binding? And this brings us to the key legal idea here, promissory estoppel. I know, it sounds super technical, but the concept is actually pretty simple. Imagine you tell a friend, hey, I'll pay for your plane ticket for our trip. So they go ahead and book a non-refundable hotel room. Well, promissory estoppel is basically the rule that says you can't just back out of your promise because your friend reasonably relied on your word and now they'd be out of real money. That's exactly what Riverwoods said the bank did to them. For Riverwoods, you can imagine their argument was deeply personal. This wasn't just some business deal to them, it was the foundation of their entire community's future. They took the bank at its word, they invested a ton of money because of it, and now they were facing disaster all because that word was broken. And the bank's defense? Well, it was cold, hard, and strictly business. Their whole argument was that without a signed, formal contract, any talks they had were just talks. In their world, a handshake or a verbal agreement meant nothing legally. It was ink on paper, or it didn't count. So you've got these two totally opposite views. One side is arguing for fairness and reliance, and the other is all about strict formal legal documents. Everything came down to how the judge would see it. So let's find out what happened. And the verdict came down. It was a stunning victory for the little guy. The court sided with Riverwoods Chappaqua. They decided that the bank's promise was, in fact, enforceable. So you're probably asking, okay, how did the judge get to that decision? Well, the court's reasoning was actually super clear, and it broke down into 3 logical steps. First, the judge found that yes, a clear and unambiguous promise was made by the bank. Second, the court said Riverwoods was completely justified in trusting that promise and acting on it. And third, and this is the real kicker, the judge ruled that the bank absolutely should have known that backing out would cause serious financial harm. It's a perfect real-world example of promissory estoppel in action. But this victory, it wasn't just about one small community. The verdict sent shock waves through the legal and financial worlds. So let's dig into the legacy of this case and see why we're still talking about it all these years later. So what did the community actually get? They were awarded $75,000 in damages. Now, it's important to understand this wasn't some kind of punishment for the bank. It was compensation. It was the amount of money the court figured they lost by acting in good faith on that promise, covering things like architectural plans and legal fees.
But the bigger takeaways are what really made this case a landmark. It powerfully showed that, in the right situation, a verbal promise can be just as strong as a written contract. It set a huge precedent for holding big corporations accountable for their words, not just their signatures. And maybe most importantly, it was this incredible testament to the power of everyday people organizing to fight for their rights.
You know, the story of Riverwoods Chappaqua is this powerful reminder that fairness and accountability can actually win. And it leaves us with a pretty big question to think about in our own lives. When it really comes down to it, who holds the power in your community, and what does it take to make sure they're held to their word?